So this article goes over, we've been talking about evolution. So this article is talking about the Florida Panthers, okay? So the Florida Panthers, their population got really, really small. And we're going to find out what happened to their population because it was so small. So the two things you're looking for is why was the small panther population a problem? List as many reasons. And then what have conservationists done to help the panther population? So those are the two things that you're looking at while I read this to you. There are some bigger words. Don't get overwhelmed. I'll translate. Okay? All right. This fall, biologists announced the apparent success of a last-ditch conservation effort. The Florida panther, once slated for extinction, has been given a second lease on life by the infusion of genetic variation. In the 1900s, this population nosedived, got smaller basically, because of hunting and habitat loss. By the 1990s, there were fewer than 30 Florida panthers left. To make matters worse, those survivors were in bad physical shape. They were riddled with diseases and parasites, had poor sperm quality and low fecundity, basically low reproductive status, as well as a host of problems like undescended testicles, kinked tails, and heart defects. Okay. Scientists predicted that the Florida panther would be extinct within 20 years, and in 1995 formulated a bold plan to save them. Okay. So the conservation plan involved improving the genetic status of the population with new blood. In 1995, 8 female pumas from Texas, a different subspecies of panther, were moved into the area and took up residence with their Florida cousins. How could just 8 panthers help save a whole population? The new panthers brought with them new gene versions, which help counteract 2 negative side effects of small population size: reduced genetic variation and inbreeding. We'll talk about what those are in a second. To understand how the conservation plan worked, it helps to understand the evolutionary importance of genetic variation and the evolutionary underpinnings of inbreeding depression. Again, they'll explain those. So genetic variation refers to all the different gene versions that are present in a population. In general, when a population loses a lot of individuals or decreases in size, its genetic variation goes down as well. This makes intuitive sense. The fewer individuals in a population, the fewer different gene versions they may carry. Over long time scales, decreased genetic variation can be a problem for a population because variation is the raw material of evolution, meaning we need genetic variation in order for evolution to happen. So natural selection acts on the genetic variation present in a population, favoring some gene versions over others and eventually producing adaptations that allow individuals to thrive in new circumstances. So without a sufficient amount of genetic variation, a population cannot evolve in response to changing environmental conditions. Hence, bringing in new panthers probably improved the Florida panther's evolutionary potential. So in order for evolution to occur, we need to have differences in our population, right? If we don't have any differences in their clones, we can't have evolution happening. Over short time scales, genetic variation is important for a population's survival as well. For example, a genetically variable or different population is more resistant to pathogens and parasites. This occurs at 2 different levels. At an individual level, populations with high levels of genetic variation generally include many individuals who are heterozygous. That is, they carry 2 different gene versions. So you learned heterozygous in bio is like 1 dominant and 1 recessive, okay? At important locations in the genome, individuals with many heterozygous genes, again like big A, little a, are less likely to be susceptible to diseases and parasites than are individuals with many genes that are homozygous. Remember, homo means same, so if they're homozygous, they're like little a, or big A, big A. So the individual carries 2 copies of the same gene version for a particular gene. That's because individuals that are homozygous, involved in parasite and pathogen resistance, have twice the chance of carrying the right gene version to resist the pathogen of the day than do individuals that are homozygous for those genes. So hetero-homozygous can get a little confusing, but they give you an analogy here, okay? It's a bit like buying 2 tickets for the raffle instead of 1. The more tickets you have, the more likely one of them will be a winner. The same reasoning applies at the population level. Okay? A genetically variable population is likely to include some individuals who happen to be genetically resistant to the disease or pest, enabling the population to survive to the next generation, even if many individuals die or become sick. For the Florida Panthers, bringing in new blood increased heterozygosity, or the different genes, improving the health of the individuals and made the population less likely to be wiped out by a single disease or parasite. So what they're saying with those raffle tickets is if you have 2 raffle tickets, you have a better odds that you're going to win, right? Same thing, if we have 2 different letters, like big A, little a, chances are we have a better chance of having one of those genes help us be resistant to a disease or help us adapt to a specific circumstance. Another genetic side effect of small population size is inbreeding, a situation in which individuals mate with their close relatives. In very small populations, like that of the Florida Panthers, this happens simply because the population is so small that all the individuals are closely related to one another. The offspring resulting from inbreeding tend to have health problems and lower reproductive success. This is known as inbreeding depression and was seen in the Florida Panthers in the form of poor sperm quality, low fecundity, which just means low reproduction, undescended testicles, kinked tails, and heart problems. Okay? Inbreeding depression occurs because of a quirk of natural selection and genetics. As natural selection acts on a population, it weeds out genes that have disadvantageous effects, but it can only weed out those genes if they're actually expressed in an individual. For dominant gene versions, that's no problem because remember they overpower. Okay, individuals carrying dominant genes with a harmful or detrimental effect will be selected against. These genes will be purged or eliminated from the population. But for recessive versions, however, the story is a bit different. Recessive genes are only expressed or seen when an individual carries 2 copies of them. Once natural selection has removed most of the detrimental or harmful recessive genes from a population, these seldom wind up paired with an identical copy and are effectively hidden from the effects of natural selection. Okay, so most of the time, right, we said dominant gene overpowers a recessive one. But in the case of inbreeding, as we're going to see, a lot of those recessive genes end up pairing up. So we end up seeing a lot more of these recessive harmful traits. Closely related individuals are likely to carry the same deleterious or harmful recessive gene version and pass 2 copies of that gene on to their offspring. Hence, the offspring of inbred matings tend to express many deleterious or harmful recessive genes, resulting in lower fitness. Introducing the new Panthers to the Florida population helped reverse the effects of inbreeding by bringing in new gene versions that masked the negative effects of the recessive gene versions already present in the Florida Panther population. So when they brought in those 8 new Panthers, those Panthers had new dominant genes that helped kind of get rid of those recessive traits that we were seeing in the population. Okay, you can kind of see that here. With inbreeding, we have big A, little a, right? And they produce an offspring with 2 of those harmful recessive genes, right? So one that's going to have a not so hot, condition. But when they brought in that new Panther, right, those new Panthers with the dominant genes, they were able to prevent those recessive, harmful conditions from happening. With an evolutionary perspective, it's easy to understand why Florida Panthers once seemed doomed. Their small population size not only put them closer to extinction in terms of sheer numbers, but also introduced the genetic risks of reduced genetic variation and increased inbreeding. Similarly, an evolutionary perspective helps explain why this conservation experiment was a success. Bringing in 8 new Panthers might seem like too little too late, but in fact, the genetic diversity they brought from seems to have had significant benefits for the population. The new gene versions from the 8 Panthers outlasted their original carriers and have been passed down through the generations of individuals alive today. Now, the population size has tripled, genetic variation is up, and signs of inbreeding are down. And over the past 30 years, the Panthers have gotten a further boost from increased legal protection and establishment of additional protected panther habitat, as well as simple measures like a new freeway underpasses that help the cats avoid vehicles. Of course, the Florida panther is still endangered and will need continued protection and even more habitat to survive for the long term. But as we've seen, understanding the evolutionary underpinnings of the panther's plight will help biologists develop effective conservation plans for their future. All right, so that was kind of a lot, but big ideas here. Why was the small panther population a problem? What are some of the reasons? Okay, so it was caused by hunting. Once their population got small, why was that? Why did we care? Why do we care? Inbreeding. Okay, what else? So there was a lot more inbreeding. Why was the inbreeding a problem? What were some of the problems in the population? They had heart problems, they had reproductive problems, and it was all because of those harmful recessive alleles were showing up in the population because of inbreeding. So many harmful recessive alleles. So what have conservationists done to help the panther population? What did they do? Anyone? What did they bring? Okay, they brought 8 new panthers. Yep, so they protected the ecosystems, right? So they had them as protected areas. They talked about highway underpasses, meaning making little areas or like tunnels for them to go through so they don't have to cross the road. So as a result, we see that that genetic variation ended up increasing. So we've been talking about biodiversity, right? One of the levels of biodiversity is genetic diversity, okay? So genetic diversity plays a big role even though we don't see it a lot. What they were talking about with the panthers, when those 8 panthers came in, that's an example of gene flow. Genes from one population going to another. So organisms from one population go to another and they bring with them new genes, okay? Genetics and biodiversity can be affected by evolution, which is what we're going to look at today. So we have 2 different types of evolution. We have microevolution and we have macroevolution. So microevolution is evolution at the gene level, right? So do we have different genes coming in and out of our population? Macroevolution is, do we have new species, right? So macroevolution is going to take a long time to develop entirely new species, okay? But microevolution, changing genes, occurs all the time. All right, so we are going to pretend you guys are, I don't know, birds or something, okay? And you need to get worms in order to survive. Now, there are different worms. On your desk, there may be one of these sheets. I'll come around and give you some more of them. Take a look at them. Okay? What I need you to do is make a hypothesis. Which color worm do you think will be eaten? Or you could say, which color worm? Well, we'll make that our hypothesis. Which color worms do you think will be eaten in the greatest abundance? So make a hypothesis. I think that blah, 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 blah. This color will be eaten in the greatest abundance, or this color will be eaten the most. So as a null hypothesis, okay, so a null hypothesis is always going to be the opposite of what you said in your hypothesis. But instead of just being the complete opposite, usually remember we say that there's no relationship, okay? So null hypothesis, what could we say? No relationship between color and the number eaten. Another way you could say this is that all of them will be eaten equally or in equal amounts. That would be a null hypothesis as well. So there's lots of different ways you could state it, okay? So here's what we're going to do. If you really do not want to go outside, I will not force you, okay? We're going to go outside right to the side of the building over here. I have a bunch of worms, right, pieces of yarn down on the ground. You're just going to collect as many as you can. We're going to bring them inside, and we're going to count how many you've collected, okay? If you want to have a snowball fight, great, all right? So grab your things. Well, you can leave your stuff in here, and we'll head outside. So you need to count up your worms, okay? You're going to write your worms on your sheet there, and then on the computer, there's a spreadsheet. What if you only took one? Then you can just write, if you just have one, you still need to put it in the spreadsheet. So you're going to put it in the spreadsheet, and it will calculate the totals. And then the totals are what you are going to use for your the rest of the questions. Here are your final numbers. So write them down on the chart on the front of your sheet, and then you should be able to answer the questions using these numbers.